Okay, we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Michelle Young and Anthony Stansfield, and we're going to be talking about this British land grab and property rights and property theft. And so I'm going to try to put this banner. I think it should be on the screen now. Let's see if it worked. There's a bit of delay. Yeah, okay, so now we've got that on there. All right, so what I'd like to do to start is to have the two of you introduce yourself and the topic. So Michelle, do you want to start?
Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Kerry. I've been investigating the financial crimes now for 20 years and being sort of head on front on the front line within the financial crimes. I've been blessed to work with some of the best whistleblowers, and I think we've unraveled quite a lot with the great property heist, with the land registry frauds, and that's what we're here to discuss this evening. Thank you, Kerry.
Okay, so Michelle, you didn't say anything about your background, so could you
Oh, okay,
introduce
right.
yourself just very
Okay, okay.
briefly?
Okay, right. I left school at 16. I went into the fashion industry. I set up my own business. I used to fly to Paris and Italy as an entrepreneur and a visionary, very successful. Then I met my husband in late 1997, and we got married. We had two children. We had a very successful business, whether you want to call it in brackets empire. You know, we've got we still have a vast property portfolio, some of the best freehold land in England, some of the biggest IPO startups that were very successful in the 80s and the 90s. And to be quite frank, my husband then set up a power of attorney in 2006 to defraud me in the family courts. And within that power of attorney, the lawyer that set that up and another man called Jonathan Brown, who's also living off the wealth. I'm not frightened to name them and shame them. Those two gentlemen had previously stolen another very vast estate called the Vienna estate. And then when I was in Miami with my husband, they realized the marriage was in trouble. So in comes Stephen David Jones, the lawyer, who set up the power of attorney with Jonathan Brown in Jonathan Brown's attorney's office in Miami. And from then on, I had a battle that started in early 2007 in the family courts. I used to prepare all my own documents. On the merits of my case, I won 65 applications. I have a bag full of hard drive evidence to prove my legal and lawful ownership. But because it's such a huge estate, the justice system has ignored the law and the evidence, even though I won everything. And now I'm coming back to reclaim my land, my property, through a very powerful freezing order with a penal notice on it. So anyone that's breached that, and there's plenty, and I'm afraid to say, including lawyers, accountants, it implicates judges that have all ignored the law and evidence. And on the freezing order, it has a penal notice. Anyone that moved assets since 2007 will have their assets either seized and or go to prison. So that's where I am now. I've got some very good lawyers who actually took their bar degree for justice.
Okay,
And
I think that's plenty at that
enough,
moment. Okay, thank you very
yes.
much.
So
And
that's
we'll
it
come
on
back
that.
around. Okay, we'll come
Yeah,
back
sure.
around to all of that. Okay, so Anthony, please introduce yourself and a bit about your background and why
Yes,
you got involved in this case.
yes, I'm Anthony Stansfeld. Um, my last full-time occupation, I was the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Thames Valley, one of the biggest police areas in the country, in the south of England. And I led nationally on fraud. Before that, I was a businessman. I was chairman of two or three little companies. And before that, I was managing director of an aircraft company that had airplanes in over 100 countries worldwide. And previous to that, I had a career in the military where I was principally either in intelligence, aviation, or the infantry. So I have quite a wide, varied background. But I got involved in this because I led nationally on fraud. And what was amazing to me was the sheer extent of fraud, the extent that many of our major accountancy companies were involved, the fact that our judiciary seemed, the civil judiciary, in the pockets, I'm afraid, of some of the banks that were most involved in this. And I found it very, very disturbing. I took it up to the Prime Minister level. Prime Minister was an MP in the area of which I was the police commissioner. And eventually I got absolutely nowhere because it went into the regulatory authorities and they all seemed to be in each other's pockets and just pushed it around and nobody would investigate it properly. And that is the situation we seem to be in today, which is disgraceful.
Right. Okay. So now we're going to go back to Michelle for the moment. And thank you very much, Anthony. So Michelle, now what was your motivation to get Anthony involved? Just was it his background? Because obviously he's got a great background. But was there anything specific about him that you wanted to bring forward?
Well, the reason I met Anthony, he was at a financial crimes event, and Anthony's been such an absolute patriot across the whole of UK. He's retired, but he's probably working longer hours now than when he was actually working in the force. And he's one of the only crime commissioners in our country that stood up to the system. He helps people constantly all the time. And I've said to him, Kerry, he's anointed by God for such a time as this, because I don't know anyone that stood up to the system like Anthony has. And thank God we've had him on our side. But what's interesting on that point, there was a very big panorama documentary recently with a few other, I call them people that have been targeted and their assets unlawfully stripped from them. And they refused to let Anthony be part of that panorama documentary. And I believe it's because he's so credible, they don't want him to speak with his background and his influence because it's the truth. Because of that credibility, I didn't think they wanted him on that program. They did exactly the same to me, Kerry. With all this, it was funded by George Soros anyway, BuzzFeed, and they did this big London grad. And they asked me to do the documentary. I knew I was being set up because you know what they do to whistleblowers and people that expose what they're doing in the system. It's a smear campaign. So I said, fine. I said, here's all my hard drive evidence of my ownership of the estate. Tell the truth. And I said, in fact, interview Anthony, let him bring the documents on, and let him speak about how systemic this is across the country. They refuse to use the footage with Anthony, with my documentary evidence and what's happening with the judicial corruption across the United Kingdom.
Okay, so we did actually I was looking it up, an interview with you back in 2024, and then you also spoke at my conference. I think maybe the summer of that year or 25, I'm not sure. But at any
24,
rate,
yes.
24, okay. So since we've last talked to you, have you had any progress? I say you've won these applications, as you call it, and keeping in mind that the audience is not all British, so some are Americans and some might be from other
Yes.
countries as well. We're having problems, Klaus, basically Schwab has actually said, you'll own nothing and be happy. This actually sounds like it's on the road to that. So what can you say about your progress thus far?
Well, I believe we're working with some very good people, including some very good lawyers that will stand up against the establishment. They know what the global plan is. And I think we've come to that moment, Kerry, where there's enough people awake in the system now to do the right thing. And I think it's taken a long time. It's taken people like me 20 years, Anthony, all the years he's done this, and many others across the country. I'm blessed to work with brilliant people who are on the front line. And, you know, now we'll come on to the Great Property Heist, which is on the Make Earth Great Again website, .org.uk, on the press release, where we've prepared 7 cases. We've kept it very simple in law. My case is one of the 7. What's interesting, Kerry, and I've got to be very frank here, this is the easier target with the financial crimes are usually women mothers with children, because they're an easier target, they're more vulnerable. So out of the 7 cases, you'll see 6 are women. And, you know, a lot of them were wealthy women because they was easy to target. Now, those 7 cases, we can show very simply that Trust Online, which is a government website, there are no judgments or debts against our names, which proves the court documents are false instruments. Because if there's no judgments or debts with a government Trust Online website, that proves there's nothing there. It's an illusion. So not only are the court documents false, but we can also show that the land registry, where we have our title deeds, are complicit and with conveyancing fraud, where I call it digital murder. They're literally taking the identity of the person, identity theft, and taking their property rights. Now, this is systemic across our country. And you'll see within that campaign on the 7 cases, the Great Property Heist, that we mentioned something called Operation Allison. Now, Operation Allison is something that the SFO, the Serious Fraud Office, and the Law Society are aware of, where there's 21.5 tons of documents that seem to have disappeared. Now, I believe this links to land registry, because I'm sure it's the same in the US, Kerry, but here in the UK, 40 to 50% at least of the population are now living in rented accommodation. So that means that they're taking the identity of our property rights and through land registry. So what we've done, we're demanding a public meeting at land registry regarding the 7 cases where we can show the false instruments. We've said where it's identity theft and they've stolen our properties, we want this as a public meeting at land registry regarding the 7. And so that journalists, whether it's alternative media or mainstream, can be at that meeting, and you can come by Zoom to make sure that we get our property titles back through something called Practice Guide 39, where the land registry are obliged to return those title deeds back to the original owner and fully compensate. Now, we've been asking for this meeting, haven't we, Anthony, since April of last year. We've got many emails. In fact, I've sent many to you, Kerry, and they're just ignoring us. They're refusing, as this is a national security issue on how many properties been stolen, as the great Klaus Schwab said, who's a Rothschild, you'll own nothing and be happy. That's exactly what they're doing. But the people have to now wake up, Kerry, all across the world, not just here, it's everywhere. And we've got to take back what they've stolen from us. And we've got to use the law that they created, but it also works for us. And that's why we need some very good heavyweight lawyers now. We need some good judges and accountancy firms to come on side with us, because if they don't, they're next.
Yeah. Can I come in, I think?
Yeah, please do. Okay.
I think the fraud has become systemic. It was against not only very wealthy individuals, as Michelle pointed out, very often very wealthy women, but it was also against companies, medium-sized and small companies. And one of the things that the banks were able to do was, when these companies took a loan from them, they would have bank accounts opened in the company's names without the companies even being aware of them. These accounts were then lent large sums of money at very high interest rates, 15, 18%. And of course, they ran up huge debts. on accounts the firm wasn't even aware that it had. And they would then demand to be paid back. They would then bankrupt the company and then sell the assets for vastly more than any debt ever was. And this went on and on and on. It wasn't done by all the British banks, but it was done by some. And some of them are international banks. They work heavily in America and places like this. They're international names. And it was absolutely systemic. What is difficult to know is how much it was down to private individuals, the senior bank managers. But at the most senior level in the banks, they were certainly aware that it was going on and did absolutely precisely nothing to stop it. And it was on a huge level. And as I said, I led nationally on fraud, and we have all our agencies that are meant to deal with these sort of things, and they all covered it up or passed the buck, so they were never investigated. And so far, I mean, Michel's case is an interesting one because it's by far the biggest. I mean, it runs into billions against the private individual, but they ran it against companies. And the sums of money we're talking about run into many, many billions of pounds. We've just had this scandal in the UK about the post office. I don't know if you're aware of that one. But that was only a few hundred million, and it was on the national press every day. This has been very carefully covered up. And it's frightening that things like the Insolvency Service, our Financial Crime Authority, and everybody just covers it up. And whether it's they don't want to know or they're complicit, it's difficult to know sometimes.
Okay, but that seems extraordinary that they would get away with that. So what you're saying is this has been going on for a while. Can you say how long with companies and then how long with individuals? Do you know?
Well, I think it started when we had what was called Big Bang. I think it was in the late 90s when the banks were suddenly given far more authority and the ability to do things. And the banks slowly took advantage of this. And not all of them, the British banks, but some of them took advantage of this, and they realized they could get away with these extraordinary frauds, and they have got away with it. And it's interesting, I do know of a few cases where the banks have actually settled out of court on this, but we have something in the UK called non-disclosure agreements. And of course, everybody to get money back
Right.
that has been swindled from you, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And these people go suddenly very quiet or leave the country or go on a round the world cruise. But it's only a small proportion, a very small proportion, have the banks overcompensated.
Okay, so it sounded like you actually went to the higher reaches of power. Maybe even the prime minister at the time. I don't know when that was.
I did. I went right up. I went up to the Prime Minister. I went to the government ministers. I had one-to-one meetings with Andrew Bailey, who's now the head of our governor of our Bank of England, but he ran the Financial Conduct Authority. And what was extraordinary, he said, this is frightfully serious. All the cases must come to me personally. So they were all shuffled along to him, and not one single one ever came out of his office. And I have all the correspondence.
Incredible. So what in this situation that you're in, do you understand what is really going on here? I mean, they call it a British land grab, but is that really what it is? I mean, what is going on with England? You've got so many immigrants, right? And so these are legitimate properties that belong in, families, one assumes, maybe even for years. And in the other case of companies and defrauding a company, it seems impossible because companies usually have many people involved in the company. They've got a lawyer, they've got, you know what I'm saying? So it seems odd to me that this would actually be going across the board like this and continuing for whatever number of years you think it's been going on. I mean, in other words, what's their objective? Is it just to make money, or is it something a little bit more devious than that?
Well, I think the banks got into a terrible state, notably National Westminster, Lloyds, the Halifax Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland. They all got into a complete hole. And really, the government gave them an almost carte blanche to recover as much money as they possibly could. And one of the ways they could do this was to basically bankrupt companies, undervalue their assets, and then flog them off. And I think they made a huge sums of money doing this. And the government, I'm afraid, looked the other way when they were doing it. And it is an ongoing scandal. This.
Well, okay, but I understand that you guys are making an effort, but what about the companies? Have they not made this public?
Yes, they have, but I'm afraid in the national press, complex company frauds aren't great news. There's much more exciting stories than the complex company fraud, and so it hasn't. I mean, there is one person, a Times reporter. Let me get his name right. James Hurley. James
Yes.
Hurley, who has tried his best to follow this up. But of course, when you find that half the banks, our national press is owned by the very people committing the fraud, by the banks. I mean, you only have to look at, for instance, the Daily Telegraph, which is one of the biggest broadsheets in the country. It's owned by Lloyds Bank. So they won't touch stories about this with a barge pole. And when people try, journalists try, and no shortage of journalists who want to try, but of course their editors are leaned on by the owners and they don't publish the stories.
Extraordinary. And you have a background as a police commissioner, isn't that right?
Yes, it's an elected post. I was elected as a police commissioner to run, to have overall oversight of one of the biggest police forces in the country, but also one which is the big area just to the west of London, also economically, probably after London itself, the second biggest economic centre in the country.
Okay, but with that kind of background, I'm very surprised that you can't be taken seriously.
Well, I was taken seriously, all right. But getting anybody to do it, anything about it. I mean, I have all my correspondence. I sat down with 2 prime ministers on this one, one to one, going through it. But I think the one thing they didn't want to do was rock the boats with the banks, which were not in a good state at all. They were trying to bail them out anyway. And so the last thing they wanted to bring down was one of our national banks. What they were actually achieving there was the bringing down of a huge number of medium-sized and smaller companies, which are basically the financial backbone of the country.
Okay, but that sounds insane also. Why would they be motivated to do that?
I think the great motivation very often of politicians is to do nothing and hope it'll go away.
Okay, but I guess I'm not super familiar with the whole political situation in England, but you do have individuals that represent your sort of jurisdiction. Who would that be in, I guess, a different person, maybe if you and Michelle don't live in the same area, who would it be, for example, in Michelle's case? Or Michelle, do you know who I'm talking about? Like, is it
Well,
the
that's
counselor or is it, who is the representative sort of person, the political representative who shows up in parliament from time to time, right? Who represents your district or in
it's called an It's called an MP.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but
So you have an MP, and have either of you approached the MPs about
yeah, I'll step right in. When I was police commissioner, I covered a huge area. I was voted for by a very large number of people. My area covered 21 parliamentary constituencies, 21 MPs.
Oh my.
So
And so none of these people want to come out about this situation?
I think individually there were some who wanted. There were also quite a lot who were looking for their next jobs outside Parliament.
Well, can't you bring an actual, I mean, I thought, Michelle, maybe I got this
I
wrong, but I
mean,
thought
there
you
are.
brought a lawsuit.
Well, it's a civil lawsuit. Civil lawsuits are incredibly expensive in this country.
Oh,
There's only been one major lawsuit on this, and it was not even one of the big ones. I think it was about 12 or 13 million went missing. And they did actually win that case, but it cost them several millions to bring it. And most people who have been taken to pieces by the banks don't have any money left, which has been the bank's great strength. And the bank will always fight it. and you end up in a civil court. And I have to say, some of our civil court judges seem to be in the pockets of the very people once prosecuting. And there's no shortage of evidence of that particular one. So it's not doesn't go to a criminal, it doesn't go to a criminal court. It's the problem. And we have almost a two-tier system with criminal courts and civil courts, and we regard fraud today, the authorities do, as a civil matter, not as a criminal matter. And it is a criminal matter, and that has been one of the underlying problems in the UK.
Okay, now Michelle, but your case isn't, if I remember correctly, your husband was killed, wasn't he, by gangsters or something?
I don't think it's by gangsters. That was a mainstream media PR campaign as propaganda. What I think happened, the people that have stolen the estate, probably Stephen David Jones, who's serving 12 years in prison, and Jonathan Brown, who's sitting in Miami very comfortably, who was part of the power of attorney document. I believe those two fraudsters, because all over my hard drive evidence, their names are all over it, moving the assets during divorce proceedings. So they need to be questioned about this, because why was all the CCTV cameras all turned off when Scott Young was murdered? Now we'll come on to Noel Reno. I sent you some things about her today on WhatsApp. Now, Noel Reno was the honey trap that was sent in, who worked with Stephen David Jones. And I've got evidence of her setting up companies before and after Scott's murder with Stephen David Jones, the lawyer that's now serving 12 years in prison. Why has she never been questioned by the police?
But now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that your husband was murdered along with this sort of overall plan to steal your properties, right? Which is worth in the billions. Isn't that right?
And the major IPOs as well.
So in other words, there was you could say conspiracy, one or more people planning something illegal to defraud you and your husband at the same time, but to kill him to make sure that he couldn't protest, obviously, and putting you in a very vulnerable position. Has any progress been made in that connection that I'm talking about here and with regard to your case?
Well, I think that, this is why we're shining the light on this evening, Kerry, because like with the 7 cases where we're asking for a public meeting with Land Registry, I've asked James Hurley at the Times, and Anthony, maybe you could ask James to contact the police in Croydon, where they've stolen our properties, and ask James Hurley to work with the police force near Croydon and demand that we, Anthony, have that public meeting in the public's interest on the 7 cases so we can take our properties back. So Michelle, I'm hoping James Hurley might do that.
I don't know. He's lent upon by the editor of the paper, I'm afraid. He can't do exactly what he wants, and that is why a lot of this is closed down. But I think you want to make the point that a lot of your properties were in America. And a lot of the companies were America. So this isn't just a UK problem in your personal case. It's very much an American issue.
It's not just American, Anthony.
No, I know it's not.
All the freehold properties, the land is in England. It's here in the UK, and they don't want to give me my properties back.
No, but the companies that you owned were Anglo-American companies. A lot of the assets were in America, and a lot of the properties were. I mean, the Miami properties.
Okay. Then why aren't those companies making this an issue, even if they are American? Isn't there something that one would assume in America? I don't think that this kind of maybe I'm naive, but I don't think this kind of fraud, it's so obvious that they wouldn't be able to get away with it. Have the companies that are partially American not stepped forward?
No, I mean, because it's all been set up through offshore accounts, we need to unravel and pierce the corporate veil. But I think where I am now, we're getting, I don't want to say too much this evening, but we're making very good progress. And there are some very good lawyers that will stand up against the other lawyers that have committed this fraud and who are in contempt of court. And you and Anthony and I, with Michael O, we've put a lot of them on notice, haven't we, Anthony, including one of the very relevant, very prominent estate agent firm. I've put some of the most prominent family lawyers on notice where they were boasting, about my husband moving £500 million in numbered accounts to Monaco. And so these lawyers, it's disgraceful, Kerry, what they're doing to families for money. They are stealing people's assets by working with one of the husband or the wife. No matter, they don't care which one it is. It destroys the children's lives, and then they lie under oath to make sure that none of that evidence is put in front of a judge. But to be on my case, we can't say that because I won every application and the evidence was there in black and white of our ownership of those assets. But I'm going to come on to something else my husband did. Before, what the family lawyers told me he would do, because I was fighting and winning all my applications, they said he'll purposely try and go bankrupt so that you don't get anything. So in 2010, in walks David Ingram of Grant Thornton, which is a Rothschild company. And he's actually should never have taken that position as a trustee because he was working for my husband, because there are companies within the estate where my husband must have instructed Grant Thornton where they'd already acted for us. So that was a conflict of interest that Grant Thornton came in as a bankruptcy trustee to defraud me.
Mm.
And this is what they're doing.
Okay. Okay, and it's not that those points don't matter. It's that because we have a larger audience, we want to make sure to keep this relevant so that people can apply it to their own situations. And there's one thing that does occur to me. For example, if an American gets involved in doing business with Britain and they were to find out that this is the kind of thing going on behind the scenes with companies, it seems to me that that would actually dissuade Americans from even getting involved with British companies. I mean, if there's no rule of law and they're not followed and all the politicians are in each other's pockets, I mean, this is probably going on in America, but in a different way. I just think that there seems to be a code of secrecy and old boys network, whatever you would call it in English terms. That's what we call it. To where these people and the bankers they're all in it.
Yes, I think it applies. It doesn't apply to the very large companies, UK companies. It's essentially a medium and small size companies. But of course, the assets of these can still run into tens of millions, and that's where the problem has been, I'm afraid.
It just seems extraordinary.
To simplify, Anthony, I'm meeting someone else on Thursday, Kerry and Anthony. I'm meeting a group of people who have all been defrauded in the family courts. The family courts need completely.
Yes, but Michelle, the much bigger game, there are many cases like that. The bigger game was the systematic destruction of companies to steal their assets.
That's the point I'm coming on to, Anthony.
And that has been the problem.
Yes, but this is systemic, and it's the family courts that need completely reforming, because what they're doing, the other person that I'm meeting on Thursday, this is how simple it is, Anthony and Kerry. And this is exactly what my husband did and many others. It's not just, this is what they're doing. They sell the company for £1 to their friend, and that company could be worth
Michelle,
£100,000.
a lot of these do involve families like yours, but a huge number are not family companies or anything like that. They're just normal companies. It's nothing to do with family courts. I would say the vast majority don't go through family courts. And the family courts have behaved disgracefully on a number of cases. But there's a
Yes,
huge, it's right across the board of
it
medium
is.
small
But
companies being
this is a,
systematically bankrupted.
but this is a threat, a potential threat to all. Well, I can certainly see a woman who is, the husband has died or whatever the
Yeah,
circumstances, right? So that are wealthy, that have assets, that
yeah.
they're looking forward to um, retirement or whatever you call it, and then they're at risk basically as
They're certainly at
they're
risk. Yeah,
prey, right? They're
absolutely.
absolutely prey. And to the English system,
Yeah,
which, because as you say, this thing has actually gone systemic, right?
Yes.
I think he has, yes.
And I have to say, you know, you could brand me because I was extremely wealthy, but I wouldn't want any human being to have to endure what I've had to suffer the last 20 years. I'm a survivor of cancer. I've been made homeless on so many occasions. It's absolutely disgraceful and
Yeah.
barbaric. And I'm only one of many, Anthony. So this
Oh, yes.
isn't just it, it's the family court, it's the insolvency court, and they're
Right.
both as corrupt as hell.
Yes, I think there is a huge amount of corruption within some of our national agencies. And
I don't
I
know.
find that quite extraordinary. I never believed that until I became a police commissioner. Said, one of the biggest in the country, and led on fraud. And I'm absolutely horrified the way a lot of our national agencies have behaved in this one.
Okay, so let's kind of round this up a little bit and so that people don't get too lost in the weeds.
Yes.
Is your remedy a legal one? Is it got to be done in court? That's the question.
If necessary, yes, it will be done in court. But because
I,
because I've got all the evidence against them, you know, Sasha Stone has said this is a landmark case because I fought them hard. It's not, I fought them right the way through the family courts. Then there's 4 different bankruptcies involved with my estate they're like a bunch of parasites living off the wealth. Why they've left me destitute. And I am one of many, Anthony. It doesn't matter whether it's a small company or a large company.
yeah,
It's the same concept what they're doing to human beings.
it
And
is.
it's unacceptable.
It is. But what has to happen is it's no good us
Uh-huh.
always regarding fraud as a civil matter. It is not. It is a
Yes.
criminal matter. And where the
Yes.
fault
Well,
lies
I certainly
with
agree with
with
that.
with our Crown
Um,
Prosecution Service. And the difference is, if it's a civil court and you take it for a civil court, you have to pay for it. It's very expensive, and the banks have a great deal more money than you have. Where
right.
it has to be taken on is by our own Crown Prosecution Service, which the government is paying for the prosecution. And its fraud is a criminal matter, and these matters should be taken up by our Crown Prosecution Service, and so the people who've been defrauded are not having to pay through the nose for lawyers against a bank that has a lot more money than they do.
So that's
Yes.
another issue on the books, so to speak. But now, what about, because again, I'm not familiar with English law and all that, but, what about barristers? Is there a way to approach a barrister, or do they only deal with the criminal matters, or how does that work?
No, they deal with civil courts as well, but it comes back to this business of you have to pay in a civil court, and the people who have taken all your money away from you have got a lot more money than you
I
have.
understand that, but I mean, I don't know how it works again in England, but you must have principled barristers who can see this, as
I,
you say, you've got other cases, you've got evidence, and this seems to be something that is actually almost procedural. It's almost gotten into the system in
I,
such a way that people are falling prey to it constantly, I would think, and that it is it's a huge scheme, a
I,
fraudulent scheme, right?
I think the problem is barristers are always members of chambers, basically a legal company around them, of which they are members. And of course, if they start taking on the banks and everything, they will be blackballed and they will lose business. So they're very frightened of taking on these cases, I'm afraid.
Well,
That's
yes,
why
but you
that's
have to
why it
have,
has to go through a criminal court, not a civil court.
well, but you can't change the law while you're trying to fight it, can you?
It's not a question of changing the law, it's a question of the government saying these cases must go through because fraud is a criminal
Okay,
matter,
and
and
who
then
would be,
we must support it and criminally prosecute these
okay,
cases
and
and pay
who
for
in the
it.
government would come out in that way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who? Do you know who? Who is, do you have
Well,
somebody particularly head of, I don't know, property management or whatever it happens to be? Do you have anyone who you've maybe neglected to go
well,
to, but could,
I mean, the person who should be doing it in this country, and I won't name him, I wouldn't trust as far as I could spit.
um,
A senior a Labour appointee by this government, and of course, it's not just this government; it was the last one too. So this
right,
isn't a matter that it's a political matter. It's really the politics behind it. Is the system doesn't want to rock the boat and upset the banks, and they don't want to have to bail out the banks again. And at least one of our major banks should be bankrupted by now. But I can quite
well,
see
there's a
that.
lot, right now, I mean, there's a lot of focus on banks failing and all
Yeah,
of that. So it's not such a far-fetched idea to bring something like this to light on top of it. But again, I guess people would like to know what your remedy is. So you want to you're trying to get some kind of meeting with this property group, right?
Yes, what we're trying to do, and I do hope, Anthony, that James Hurley might the Times need to investigate the 7 cases, why Land Registry have denied our rights to that meeting when we have a right to have that meeting with the evidence we've got, Kerry. And you've seen it, Anthony, on the 7 cases. So if we could get one of the media to actually say to the police, we now need you to investigate the 7 cases and demand, like we have, that Land Registry hold this public meeting, which is a national security issue on how many properties that are being unlawfully taken across our country.
I think the trouble is the printed press is
Oh,
owned and has its overdrafts with the very banks that are causing the problem, that have caused the
yes.
problem. And as I said, one of them is actually owned by one of the biggest perpetrators,
Oh,
the one that
God.
has about the biggest
Right.
circulation. So it's
Well,
difficult to get it out.
yeah, I hear you. Well, I have to say that I think that this will be of interest to Americans, what's going on over there. And it's possible, I don't know, that there's something similar going on in this country, and even other countries. Have you reached out to try to get some kind of coalition or a group of people in America who might be also involved in something like this, where you could, bring more press to the picture?
I think that would be a great idea. If you have any ideas on that, Kerry, with your contacts, please put them in touch with
Yeah.
Anthony and I.
Well, it's not I mean, normally I don't go into this area, so it's not really my area,
Yes.
but I can see where there could be pathways, because there is something where you call, even, in the alternative press, certainly, where they're talking about, who really owns the property, right? Even when you paid for it, your house, who really owns it at the end of the day? And then who owns your car, like you paid in full for your car? And then it's the letter of the law versus the interpretation, and that there are ways that governments can seize assets, and that is what you're talking about. You're talking about a government behind the scenes, aren't you? And you're
Yeah.
talking about banks, but you're also talking about government officials who are part of this incredible conspiracy to basically, to defraud the people, right, of
Well,
their
Yes.
I mean,
of their
the
properties and so on.
the British banks are up to their neck in these mortgage frauds, where a mortgage that's worth 100,000 is probably on somebody's books that's worth 10 million, because it's been sold so many times. It increases its value every time. One of the first things I did when I became involved in all of this was I made absolutely certain I didn't have a mortgage on anything. I didn't trust it one little inch. And I think, there is a huge underlying problem in America and in the UK on the value of mortgages, which I said are propping up banks and businesses, having been sold 10 times to a value that is many times the actual value of the property. Now, I'm afraid I've got to go now because
All
my
right,
back
I want to thank you
is
both
right
for
down.
being here.
That's
I think we've
really
gone on
kind.
long enough, and I appreciate everything. You've both been very succinct and putting out the information very well. So thank you so much. Michelle, do you want to make some parting remarks? And Anthony, you may go if you'd like, other than, if you'd like to say something before you leave,
Okay,
that's
well,
fine.
thank you very much for having me on. I'll close down. My battery is just about to die. Okay.
No problem.
Anthony, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Anthony.
All right.
Thank you, Kerry, for this podcast. And what I'd like to do, Kerry, we do have on the makeearthgreatagain.org.uk website, we have a funding page, Give, Send, Go. So if we could ask now for people to donate regarding the 7 cases, so we can then maybe instruct a GDPR barrister. GDPR, you have the same in America. So where this is identity theft on the 7 cases, and if we could get some funding on the funding page of our website.
Oh, okay.
And donate through Give, Send, Go.
All right. So your website, though, the URL, so I can put it out there, is MEGA.
Make Earth Great Again.
Yes.
.org.uk.
Okay.
And there is the donation page with Give, Send, Go. And then we could instruct a GDPR barrister that can then get behind all the transactions. Thank you very much, Kerry.
Yes. This is another interview I did with you actually back in 24, but I just wanted to get this on the screen. So in case people want to take a picture of it and also go watch the previous interview in case that's helpful. So I'm sure they'll find it, though. That's a very easy name to remember. So, okay. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Kerry.
Best of luck on this situation. I think that there's a lot of fraud going on between the people and the government institutions and officials who are actually defrauding the people, taking away their assets, and actually, I think this might even be a worldwide problem at this point.
Well, I do think we've got solutions. We're working on them here, and I think everyone is in the US. And it's time to take back control, Kerry. We now know who's behind Epstein. That was a Rothschild operation.
Sure.
The truth is coming out now, and truth is the light. And it's time that, the whole of humanity takes back from the 2%, the 98%. It's time to recover everything. As Gene Decode has said, there could be up to 4 quadrillion that they've stolen. So who are the debtors? We're the creditors, aren't we?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
So we'll leave it on a positive note. And thanks very much, Kerry, and God bless, and thank you for this.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Kerry, thank you for that.